Hey folks, it's Sam, and I'm talking today about Mars in Cancer and 3 tips for Mars in Cancer, as he has been in Cancer now for a couple months, and he's going to be going back into Gemini. I just made a post. I'm going to be talking about these things today. I made this post on Instagram, and I'm going to be outlining it in this video. It says Mars is currently retrograde in the sign of Cancer and will remain in Cancer until January 20th of 2025. Then it goes back into Gemini until April 1st. Then it returns to the sign of Cancer until June 6th. For all of us, blah, 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 etc. I'm going to go over all of this today as I describe this shift of Mars in Cancer. Today it's also joined the moon. Then it's going to go back into Gemini. Then it's going to go back into Cancer. Again, back and forth. It's started there in August of 2024, as I wrote in this article here, which I'm going to go over. And so it's a big shift that's happening now for all of us, wherever the sign of Cancer and the sign of Gemini falls, whichever house that falls for you. These two houses and these two very important areas of life, Gemini, where we're trying to understand the nature of the world and gathering a lot of data and information about it, and Cancer, where we need to anchor that in the heart and not just spin out emotionally. These two very important aspects of life are being worked on now until next summer. So again, this is a very important time right now, and to understand these things. So, I'm also going to be, or I just want to also make sure that people know that you can get the 10 most important shifts in my 2025 Vedic astrology forecast. This is like the first one where we start the year off with this shift happening. But then there's a bunch of other ones. Retrogrades. Early in the year, we have all this energy going through Pisces. Then Jupiter goes into Gemini, May 15th. By the way, in this free forecast, I talk about what that shift means for you, each of the 12 signs. Then we have a bunch of other things that we also have throughout the year. That's free. You can also see how those 12 shifts will affect your sign. All of the forecast for 2025 for each individual sign is done. And you can also even get an individual 2025 and you, where I look at your chart relative to all of these big changes. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today. And of course, please, subscribe to the channel and get notified if you want to get more, videos like this. But today we have a lot of ground to cover. So I want to just get back into this overview and this sign of Gemini and Cancer, and where Mars is currently retrograde in the sign of Cancer and will remain there again until January 20th of next year. So he's retrograde, then he goes retrograde back into Gemini, right? He goes back here, January 20th, he'll go back into Gemini. Then he stays there until April 1st. He'll be in Gemini. He'll stop, then he'll go forward again until April 1st, then returns to the sign of Cancer on June 6th. So for all of us, this is a time where we must learn to balance deep and often confusing emotions through the sign of Cancer with intelligence and discrimination, which is the nature of Gemini. The cycle actually began August 28th of 2024 when Mars entered Gemini. So since then, Mars went into Gemini August 28th, and we've been in that sort of information gathering. Okay, it was August 28th until October 20th when Mars went into Cancer. He's been in Cancer since October 20th. Now he's retrograde. So again, these two signs, Gemini and Cancer, have been activated since August 28th. So wherever the two houses of Gemini and Cancer fall relative to your ascendant, that have been a battleground since the end of August, a battleground between the heart and mind what you think and how you feel. Again, so this Gemini is what you think and your information gathering and your curiosity. And Cancer is how that lands in your heart. And so the information that we gather in Gemini needs to be anchored in the heart. Otherwise, it's just disconnected. And we have this illusion of understanding something, but it can just make us ungrounded and restless emotionally if we don't comprehend what we're doing. So again, wherever those two houses in Gemini, of Gemini Cancer fall relative to your ascendant have been a battleground since the end of August, a battleground between the heart and mind, what you think and how you feel. So for example, if you're a Scorpio person, this is between your 8th and 9th houses. 8th house of vulnerability and 9th house of how that vulnerability leads to a higher teachings and higher purpose. Those two aspects of life. If you're Pisces, this is between your 4th and 5th house, how the 4th house of your emotional state leads to what you create in your life. Right? So these two houses have been pivotal, and it's for almost a year that you are working on this lesson, whether you know it or not. So again, this is what astrology shows. So eventually you need to bring these things into harmonic balance, where the information you gather through Gemini becomes anchored in the heart through the sign of Cancer. Instead, what happens instead is Gemini is too often a lot of random and overstimulated snacking types of data gathering, which leads to excessive emotional confusion. And we vacillate between these two counterfeit qualities of Gemini and Cancer. So you may hear me talk about this all the time, this aspect of like snacking behavior, snacking, right? People love to snack on astrology videos or this thing. There's nothing wrong with it. And again, people don't like when I say these things because they think you sound so mean and so critical. I'm not. I'm just pointing out that gathering a lot of data is not knowledge or wisdom. And if it's not anchored in your experience, which is actually what it means to be anchored in the heart, then it's just a lot of disconnected, random ideas and how they make you feel. Again, it's actually also really quite simple. How do you feel when you, let's say, again, here's a perfect example. Let's say watching the news. Watching the news is a very Gemini thing. Okay, I'm going to watch the news and gather some information about the world. Well, how does it make you feel? Particularly things that you don't really understand or you have no control over. Now, by the way, I'm not saying we shouldn't watch the news. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, think of what happens. The connection between the data you gather, your input. You can really look at Gemini in some ways very much as just the sign of input from the world. Right now, you're taking in input, you're relating through your Gemini, and it's landing in your heart, in your Cancer. Right now, as you're watching me come at you, you're bringing input, which is very Gemini, and then it creates a feeling, which is very much the sign of Cancer. So this is a process that happens all the time in our life, right? That's why I'm saying, but when it's powerful, when it's empowering, then we're not just snacking and gathering input, more stimulation, which is creating restlessness. I don't really understand, but I think I understand. And we formulate conclusions based on information we don't really understand, and then it calcifies into a feeling that we have. And again, this is very much how it works. Notice I said calcifies into a feeling because Cancer is very much where those ideas go to kind of land into a feeling, and feelings are much less fluid than ideas. The ideas create the feeling in many ways. Think of the things that are deeply embedded feelings that you have. You can explain, oh yeah, I feel this way because blah, blah, blah. And then you have an explanation. And again, some of it is very good. Some of it, again, notice the difference between the things that really connect you, that you can explain really well, where you've gathered a lot of authentically good information based on experience, because that's also what Gemini is really about. In the highest sense, it's the information that's based on experience, not just data gathering. So this is why when I talk about things like overly stimulated snacking types of data gathering, this is very much where we just keep eating and eating and not chewing and swallowing and digesting. We can take the same amount of energy and focus it on good data, good information. So again, I use this analogy all the time when I talk about people maybe who want to study astrology with me, who want to maybe study my, certification course or something like that. I'll say things like, you can take the same amount of energy that you take or that you expend going out snacking on other videos and all of this stuff. If you really want to learn it, instead of just have it be, oh yeah, this is another sort of curiosity. Oh yeah, there's astrology and there's Jungian psychology and there's tarot and there's crystal healing and there's this psychic person and all of it. Again, I'm not trying to diminish it or demean it, but what I'm saying is if someone is really wants to learn something like astrology or something, then you can take the same amount of energy that's going in all these different directions, or even with 15 different teachers or whatever it might be, and just use the same amount of energy to focus. Key word with life and with Gemini and with all of that stuff is focus. You can take the same amount of energy and focus. It's still the Gemini energy. You're still gathering information, but instead of it being just this kind of snacking behavior where you're just snacking here and there, which is creating this illusion of understanding. And trust me, look, I've been doing this for a living for more than 20 years. I see the range of students. I see the difference between people who are, even if they've been snacking for 20 years, they think they know a lot more than they know because they don't practice any of it. They don't put, let's say, like with the astrology, they don't actually practice it. They don't put any of it into practice. They just gather a lot of stuff and then have a lot of opinions and sometimes want to argue with me. And it's almost like, why are you, you're not my peer. You don't even practice. You've just gathered a lot of information, which is fine. But if you want to actually learn something and have it anchored in the heart, this is the point, is when you take that same focus and that same energy rather of Gemini and you focus it. So it's not just snacking. Then what happens is it goes deep into the heart and it becomes a source of knowing. Then you know it. Then there's knowledge. There's not just a lot of information and disconnected data that's disconnected. And what it's disconnected from is the heart. The heart. You need to think of the sign of Cancer, and you need to think of the heart as being different than the emotions. They're not the same thing. Now, we tend to experience the heart through the emotions, but they're not the same thing. Just like the ocean is not the waves. The waves are on the surface. Emotions are the surface of the heart. But what goes deeper than all of the emotion is something that you become devoted to. Like, for example, when someone actually wants to learn the astrology, like the way I said it, instead of just snacking here and there on this thing or that thing, and just getting stimulated and having fun. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to be insulting. I do it too, especially we live in an age of stimulation. And this is why it's so important to even think about and talk about this Gemini Cancer equation, because we live in an age of stimulation. And this age of stimulation is deeply connected to the sign of Gemini. And also Rahu. Rahu and Mercury, and particularly Gemini, are archetypes for this age of stimulation and overstimulation, and the misunderstanding that all of this stuff, we're all YouTube genius experts now, right? Oh, we all are experts on, just to use, to be controversial, vaccines and immunology and all the stuff that we all are experts on now because we have YouTube University and astrology and all this stuff. But again, going and finding information or data that you believe is right, but you don't really know it, is just disconnected data. And we live in an age now where it's ubiquitous. So the difference between the power of Gemini and the power of Cancer is what I'm talking about here, right? So what happens is Mars, again, he's set up in Gemini back in August 28th. So from August 28th until October 20th, Mars went through Gemini. So think back at that time, the end of the summer till October 20th. Then Mars went into Cancer, and he's in Cancer now, and he's going to be there until January 20th, when he goes back into Gemini. Then he turns direct, and then he goes forward again. So he's back in Gemini January 20th until April 1st. Then from April 1st until June 6th, he goes through Cancer again. So this is, Mars going through 3 times. Or I'm sorry, twice, I should say. He goes through Gemini, Cancer, back and forth. So instead of this counterfeit Gemini and Cancer energy, see, what happens is I just described the counterfeit version and alluded to the more empowering version. The counterfeit version is the kind of default, egoistic, animalistic, data gathering information that creates some feeling in the heart that's usually restless. It creates emotions. We have a lot of emotions about this data that we gather. And again, but data and emotions are kind of similar. Data creates emotions. Data and information creates emotions. But pure knowledge and wisdom creates devotion. The deeper level of Gemini is not just data. It's authentic curiosity that has discrimination and that questions whether or not the data, not just questions whether the data is good or whether gathering data is even a good thing to be doing with our buddhi or intellect. So the deeper that we are with the Gemini, then the deeper we go with the Cancer part. So it's not just emotions, a lot of emotions, it's devotion, and we're connected to the heart, not just bouncing up and down on the waves of all the emotional excitement and aggravation and whatnot. And so again, this is also why and how we are experiencing a lot of the shifts. And as you see in this, as I have this free forecast, there are more than 10 of these shifts coming in the year ahead. And again, the first one is this one that starts off the year with this Mars between Gemini and Cancer going back and forth, right? Then we have this whole, again, this whole big thing in Pisces. And by the end of it, Saturn is going to set up in Pisces for the next couple of years. So again, if you're not ready for this, it's coming. Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde, solar eclipse in Pisces, and then Saturn in Pisces. So Pisces is going to have a huge focus for the next couple of years, starting actually in the middle of February when Venus goes in, and then Jupiter changes. Again, he's been in Taurus, then he goes into Gemini. And the other thing that happens is then, we also have a Mercury retrograde cycle that's going to go through Cancer. So in 2025, not only are we dealing with these shifts that I'm talking about, with Mars going back and forth, but then Jupiter is going to go into Gemini. Mercury is going to go retrograde in Cancer as well. So these two signs of Gemini and Cancer are getting a lot of energy. So it's not only that Mars is going back and forth, provoking deeper knowledge. As it says here, Mars is now provoking a deeper instinctive look into this incredibly important area of everyone's personal development, the transition between Gemini and Cancer that I just explained. This is the transition of Gemini and Cancer for everyone. We're all dealing with it in some way. For myself, for example, as a Gemini person, this transition between Gemini and Cancer is, of course, very personal because Gemini is my first house. So the transition between this Mars and Gemini and Cancer is very personal, about personal identity. And all of that data, information kind of stuff that I'm talking about is not just another aspect of life. For me, in many ways, my identity in this lifetime revolves around that concept. It revolves around the concept of understanding and unraveling this aspect of life, right? It's not, but that's because it's my first and second house, right? Again, if you're Libra, it's your 9th and 10th houses, right? And this is why these, like when I do the forecast, like for example, this personal forecast where you can just get, it's not that much for your sign. Like if you have that Libra ascendant, then this shift that I'm talking about here, this shift between Gemini and Cancer happens in your 9th and 10th houses. So you're experiencing that Mars shift between Gemini and Cancer. If you're Libra, where you're trying to bring your higher purpose from the 9th house into your work, into the 10th house, right? If you're Sagittarius, it's going from your 7th house to your 8th house. So again, that means that this Mars, which is now in Cancer, if you're Sagittarius, it's going through your 8th house of vulnerability. Then it goes back into Gemini, 7th house of other people working through your vulnerabilities with other people. So again, this is why people wind up getting these personal forecasts where I go over these 10 shifts for each person. But again, you can also get all 12 of the forecasts and have them for the other people in your life. You can also have me, if you want, look at your chart in relation to all of these shifts and also your planetary cycles and things like that. So I just put these up here as well. But so again, these 3 tips for Mars in Cancer. Okay. So I just show, and for this Mars in Cancer and Gemini. So the first tip, and again, they were explained in my overview so far, is less snacking. Take the same energy. Instead of having Mars driving you into exhaustion. And you notice I didn't even really mention he's debilitated there. Everybody obsessed over that. Yeah, he's not in good dignity in Cancer. He's not in good dignity in Gemini either. And by the way, this is also why one of the big shifts of next year is when Mars goes into Leo. He finally breaks out of this back and forth here between Gemini and Cancer. So Mars is exhausting us. So the first tip is don't be so overstimulated. Overstimulation is why you are feeling this emotional exhaustion from overstimulation. It doesn't mean, don't do this or don't do that. Do less and be focused on good data, good information, not overstimulated snacking. Eat the good food. That's tip 1. And tip 2, stay with your habits and routines. Mars, when he's powerful, gives us the discipline and the courage to do what we know is right. To do what we know is right. The reason Gemini and Cancer, these 2 signs, are difficult is because Gemini is not what's right, it's what's fun and enjoyable and interesting. Again, that's beneficial in other aspects of life. Mars isn't concerned with what's interesting or what's fun. He's concerned with what's right. And by the way, the Mars part of us, if we shrivel from the battlefield because, oh, I'd rather have fun than fight for what's right, that Mars part of us really suffers. It's like the father who would rather go out and party rather than provide for his family. We can already hear how out of integrity that is. Mars is the part of us that wants to do what's right. And again, Cancer also has no agenda for that. Cancer is not doing what's right. It's doing what I feel like right now. And that's not right, quote. It's not necessarily what's right. It's how I feel. So again, Mars is the energy where when these things come up, stay on your practices. And it's not that hard. Wake up, do your meditation, do your breathing. And what happens is then that focus of Mars takes you to that deeper devotional space. Because the planet is the power. It still has the power. Even when it's in a difficult sign, the planet is the one with the power. It's just in an environment that's not supporting it so much. But this also means that when you access the power and you push through the difficulty, you get it magnifies the planetary potential. And the third one is introspect. It's similar, but it's don't fight. Don't project outward the frustration. Don't blame others. Don't get into fights. Don't act like a big frustrated baby, which is really what Mars is in Cancer and in Gemini. Gemini is very argumentative in a very archetypal sense. When I see Mars in Cancer in someone's chart, I know they can be very argumentative. And instead of doing what they know what's right, they argue about ideas that they think are worth arguing over. And again, you might say, well, yeah, we all do that or whatever. Yeah, but it's a waste of Mars time and energy. And it's a waste of Gemini energy because Gemini is not about arguing. It's simply not. And again, we don't understand these things because we're so confused about what astrological things indicate. Powerful Gemini energy does not argue, does not want to argue, will not argue. Mercury does not argue. Simple. It's a very simple thing. So anyway, arguing and all of these other kinds of things and getting into emotional battles, passive aggressive. Again, one of the archetypes again of Mars in Cancer, passive aggressive. I'm not aggressive. Oh, I'm not mad. I'm hurt. Oh, that's always the big passive aggressive thing. When you can see someone is mad and you want to try to talk about it. You know, like every man trying to talk to every woman. You're like, what, is something bothering you? You seem upset. I'm not mad. I'm hurt. You hurt me. Okay. You're mad. Can we just be real? Because again, and the difference is that if you're mad, then you have to own being mad. If you're hurt, then I did it to you, right? Or then you're the victim and I'm the perpetrator. Again, get out of these, try to see through this silliness, this childishness. And again, when Mars gets in these watery qualities and problems, it becomes passive aggressive and just delusional. So again, have the courage to do the practices that you know are right, watch overstimulation, and watch passive aggressive games and things like that. So again, just to recap some of the things, if you're interested here, again, I do appreciate that people watch the video. If this is helping you, leave a positive comment, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate that. And again, you can certainly get the 2025 forecast. This is a free forecast, the 10 shifts that you must know. And if you want to find out how those shifts impact your sign, you can do that here. And you can even get a 2025 and you personal assessment where I'll do that as well. So thanks a lot.